first of all. So I actually had a taste from two different schools. So the first 2 years of the Bold program, I was in one school. Can't hear me? The first 2 years I was in one school, and then the third year I moved to one of the other schools. So I represent, I guess, in some ways, 2/5 of the schools. And have a broader perspective because they were very different experiences. One of the challenges in the field I have felt, as we have done a lot of our work, is that the field is still relatively new. A lot of what people are saying that they are doing, they are not really doing, right? So that's important to keep in mind, and that's why this research is so important, right? Because it's helpful for us to see whether what we think is happening is really happening. I was at a conference last year where we had numerous millennials stand up and speak as if they were the experts and say, and when you ask them, when did you start doing this? Oh, 6 months ago, right? So that's the state of the field. So you have to be careful and make sure that you are, turning to the right places for good information. Just to reiterate the clarity over the why, so we don't call it blended learning in our school anymore. We talk about personalized learning. Blended learning is it's a weird definition, doesn't really say much. And for us, the why is very clear, personalized learning. That was what drove us very clearly. And part of our success, I think, was saying no much more often than yes. Technology can go in so many different directions, and our ability to say, this is what we're doing. We're using technology for personalized learning. We're not using technology for a whole slew of other things that we could be doing because there's such an allure to try to say, let's do this and let's do that. So that, I think, has been part of our success as well, being willing to say no far more often than yes in terms of what we're using technology for. So let me go through just quickly, based on some of these comments. For us, I think what I see as some of the positives, some of the neutrals, and some of the challenges. On the positive, the school looks very different today than it did a few years ago. Teachers are far more focused on personalized learning. We're far more student-centered. So theoretically, right, if personalized learning was to disappear for us tomorrow, I think we would still say the experience was a positive experience because the classrooms look different. The learning happening is very different, right? So that's one of the positives to me that really came from the Bold program. Data is another, I think, really important positive. We have forced data meetings, and I call them forced data meetings because teachers often don't want to go to those meetings, but we spend a tremendous amount of time and resources analyzing data. And we have found that that's incredibly helpful. Far less students, I think, are falling between the cracks because we're so on top of that issue. So I think that would be one of the other real positives. And I think there was mention made before of the grading system, right? Whenever you talk about a radical change, it really makes you think differently about so many aspects of what goes on in your school. And it forced us to think about assessment very differently, which led to all types of interesting changes. For example, our report cards look radically different today than they did a few years ago, and that all really came from this process. So the one thing I think on the positive side is even sort of the side benefits that we didn't even expect or think of when we started the process were really positive. One comment on the neutral side. So the data that you saw about student success, so in my mind, I'm not nervous about that, and I'll tell you why. I think of it like, use a sports analogy, like an expansion team. Right? You don't expect the expansion team to win the World Series after 3 years. So in my mind, if we still have stable data after 3 years and we haven't lost, but we've seen all these other positive changes and we continue to build on it, in my mind, I'm very satisfied with that. And I feel like, we haven't seen any negatives. And as we continue to build, and we have a good sense, I think, of where we're working well and what we still need to work on, in my mind, there's still tremendous opportunity and potential for what we are doing. Things we would have done differently, this was said already, but I would just emphasize that we've just gone slower. That to me is the biggest piece. When we started in the second school I was at, we started 2 separate grades in 1st and 5th grade. There was a lot to manage. We didn't really have much experience in blended learning. So things we would have been thinking about, we would have thought about the model that works best through us. There are different models when you think about personalized learning, digital content, what we're using, the parent body, thinking a little bit more carefully about educating them both before, during, and after, how to involve them in understanding what blended, personalized learning is. One thing I think that is critical is having a teacher, leader, sort of champion on the ground is critical. And I think we saw that in the other school I was involved in, where we had, while we were still trying to build this culture, the champion left, and that created, I think, a lot of chaos. finding ways to see what's in the field, figuring out not only going to conferencing schools, but really figuring out which conferences and which schools to attend. Infrastructure was one of the things that we could have spent more time thinking about to make sure we're really ready to go. So those are some of I think that was probably the biggest issue for us. Two final thoughts. So one is the comment about limiting student creativity. So I do agree. I think at this point, for us, personalized learning, the technology that's out there does not do a great job with higher level thinking. So any school that's considering this has to go in with that assumption and figure out what exactly the technology can give and what it can't. I think is really important. And the last thought is just on cost savings. So this is actually a comment from Eli Kanai, who works at Avichai. He made this comment a few years ago when we were talking about the cost savings issue and noting that the schools did not see significant cost savings. His comment was the following. He said that may be true right now, but he said, I think that you are much better positioned for another 2008. Right? In other words, if there is a major crisis, which we know will happen at some point, the model that we are using, if necessary, I think could allow us to see significant cost savings in a much more seamless way than if we were sort of where we were 5 years ago and had a major financial crisis and had to figure out what to do then. So that's a point that I thought was actually very interesting and has really stuck with me, and hopefully we won't have to test it out for a long time, but it's still always helpful to be thinking about that. So that's sort of some of the just responses about some of the data that you saw. So.